Franklin D. Roosevelt once said, "Real estate cannot be lost or stolen, nor can it be carried away. Purchased with common sense, paid for in full, and managed with reasonable care, it's about the safest investment in the world." And real estate is what we do. This is the Realtors Radio Network. There's no sense in overcomplicating real estate. And if you're a first-time home buyer, an investor, or a real estate agent, you're about to get useful, practical, and smart advice on every facet of real estate. Welcome to the Realtors Radio Network. Now your hosts, Santos Garcia, Marcos Suarez, and Dawn McCullough.
So just wanted to go over some Q&As for today episodes.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we have some listener questions out there. So what were some of the questions, Santos?
First one is, what is the home buying process like?
Okay, good question.
All right, you can handle that.
So I'll talk a little bit about the process, or maybe just starting the process,
Sure.
right? So
Very basic stuff.
of course. So first I would say, well, getting pre-approved is always the first step in the process, but it doesn't always start specifically that way. So most of the times I find that a buyer will ask for a referral of a real estate professional, and they'll contact the real estate professional first. After they're contacting them, usually we'll set up some type of a buyer's consultation, get an idea of what they're looking for, what areas they are looking in, make sure that we can service those areas, right? And then we'll find out, are they working with a mortgage rep, or do they need, somebody to be recommended for that, to them, that kind of thing. So I think in that buyer's consultation is kind of the outline, or even the expectations of the whole process start to finish. So let's say that, you meet with a realtor, typically in their office, or some people do like a Zoom consultation or something like that. Like I mentioned, kind of a buyer's questionnaire, going over how many bedrooms, bathrooms, do they need a garage, do they want a finished basement, maybe the must-haves versus, or like the wants versus needs, right?
Sure.
Yep.
Typically the wants list is much longer than the needs list. But, do you need a pool? Could you live without a pool? If it had a pool, all those kind of things. I guess I would also say, depending on what type of property they want to buy, right? If they're looking for a condo, do they have pets? Because there are a lot of pet policies in place. Are they looking to buy a multifamily? Do they need a unit to be vacant for them to move into at closing? Is this going to be their primary residence? Just getting more familiar with what they're actually looking for. And sometimes before you even take the next step of getting pre-approved, it's a matter of assessing, is it realistic or not, right? Because I'll meet with people and sometimes we'll go over, just to give you an example, with today's market, somebody putting 5 or 10% down, you're not going to get a mortgage payment of $1,500 or $1,800 a month to be all in, including taxes and insurance and all this kind of stuff. So if I always ask people, what are you comfortable with on a monthly payment? And if they start to tell me those numbers like that, I know, well, that might not even be an option in our area. And if it's not, maybe we'll expand out, or some people go to surrounding states where things are maybe much less expensive or whatnot. But that's why it's going to be important to connect them with the lender as well, just to make sure expectations are in line or realistic, and then really getting an idea of what somebody's purchasing power is, right? So I always like to do the buyer's questionnaire, just to get an idea of, a little bit about who they are. Do they need to be a hop, skip, and a jump away from schools, or from, by us, it's really big to be close to New York City transportation. You know, some people want to be, I get sometimes people say I need to be close to, you know, the coffee shop or the gas station. I don't know if we're going to say that in 5 years from now, right? It might be, where are all the EV charging stations?
Right.
It's those kind of things that let me know, am I able to help this person? Am I able to service them? You know, that kind of a thing. Getting into the pre-approval process, I feel like there's a little bit of a misconception about that, right? In a way, I hate to compare it to cars, right? But some people go to a car dealership before they know if they can even afford a car. They fall in love with the car, and maybe they find some miracle of getting a car loan or whatever else. And it's almost the exact opposite process of how it is when you buy a home.
Right.
Yep.
But you'll want to know, just like I mentioned about the monthly payments, I have people that are qualified. I have a guy right now, he's qualified for more than $1 million. But with the monthly payment that he's looking at, he really needs to be in like the 550 to 600 range. So pairing with the lender and saying, hey, first of all, I might not necessarily know as a realtor how much is their purchasing power, but on top of that, where do they need to land in terms of that monthly payment?
So as a loan officer, you would know that, and that's why you would have to go through that process first.
Exactly. And there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of layers to the whole pre-approval process, right? Is the person an employee of a company? Are they self-employed? Just a lot of different areas or kind of digging into, you know, has this person been filing tax returns? That comes up a lot, right? Like everybody's ready to buy the house, they just want a handshake and the keys in hand, but you know, oftentimes not oftentimes, but all the time, when you're borrowing money, you're kind of at the mercy of a lender, right? Sometimes we get a buyer that says, oh, well, you know, why do I have to do this? You know, or sometimes, you know, the lender is asking for documentation and the buyer says, oh, no, thank you. You know, I don't want to do that.
Right.
I just want the loan. But we're at the mercy of the lender, of course, because they're lending the money, right? And they're always protecting their asset.
The problem is that a lot of the times as a realtor, you want to go out there and take off and, oh, sure, I have a buyer, I have a client that I'm working with, and, you know, you skip that process. That's a fatal process to skip, you know, steps to skip, where you have to have that pre-approval in hand to know what their purchasing power is. Because if not, you're just spinning your wheels as a realtor. Now you go and look at the house, they fall in love with that house, and guess what? They can't afford it because what they didn't tell you, but they seem to know ahead of time, was that, hey, you know, I filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago, or I had a short sale 2 days ago. So yeah, that happens. Every once in a while, you'll have that buyer out there that somehow forgot to tell you that they filed for bankruptcy last year, and they really can't buy something now. They have to wait an extra year or two, depending on the type of bankruptcy.
That's why viewing homes without a pre-approval usually leads to disappointment.
It does.
It does.
Lead to disappointment. Yeah.
Probably always leads to disappointment.
Always, yeah.
And you know,
always.
and I think the other part to it is sometimes people just don't know. Like, oh, I co-signed for a car loan, but that wasn't my car. You know, that was somebody else's car, and it got repossessed, but it wasn't really my car. But it's still on your credit.
Right.
So, and there's a very, very big misconception about, you know, co-signing or being a co-borrower on a loan for somebody, that people always say, you know, oh, but that wasn't mine. I was just co-signing for them. But when you do that, they're using your income to qualify.
Right.
In addition to their own. And you're also saying, if that person doesn't pay, I am going to pay. You're guaranteeing that those payments are going to be made. So
Yes.
you're jointly, equally affected by any defaults.
Yes. If you're listening out there, watching this show on the internet, please, if you've co-signed for someone, you're telling the whole world that you are now willing to pay when that person decides not to pay anymore. So you are responsible for that loan, that car, that home. you're responsible.
So it's interesting, is a lot of landlords, I'll hear that a lot of landlords won't allow people to co-sign, like they don't want co-signers, non-occupying co-signers, because they know that somebody that's co-signing a lease never intends to pay for that rent if the person that's actually living there and renting it doesn't pay.
Yeah.
So, but I wanted to also talk about one other thing. We talked about the pre-approval process. The last thing that you want to do is start spending money, you know, whether it's your gas and your time and seeing properties and all that kind of stuff, or even getting in contract and starting inspections, appraisals, and all this kind of stuff where you're incurring fees, most likely in excess of $1,000, in excess of $1,500, and then find out that you weren't thoroughly vetted through the pre-approval process,
Yeah.
right? So it's more than just entering your info online and having a pre-approval just spit out, you know, in your email or printer. It's really, did this person, you know, verify my income, my assets, check my credit, all that good stuff to make sure that my financial house is in order for me to be able to buy.
Right.
And so it benefits you as the buyer. It benefits the seller also, because we're asking them to take their home off the market for one exclusive buyer, and everybody should be acting in good faith in the transaction, right? So some people come to me and say, oh no, I'm gonna get pre-approved once I find the house that I like, right? But I'll tell you that a lot of buyers are not organized in the documents that they'll need to get pre-approved, and sometimes it takes them 2, 3, 4 weeks to get their documents together. Well, if you go out and see a home, especially with the market condition right now and kind of the fast pace of the market condition and the competition, no seller is going to wait,
No,
Right.
you know,
no chance.
weeks. So that you have to be ready to go, ready, aim, fire as soon as you see the property that you like.
They're not even waiting days.
No, and that's why it's important to have the right realtor, you know, as your agent, because the right realtor is going to educate you a little bit before you start that process and let you know these are the documents that you need to bring to your loan officer. You know, these are the things that we need to do to get pre-approved. Let's get you going in that direction quickly before we set out, you know, on the home search, because at some point we are going to get out there looking at homes, and you know, you'll have to keep in mind that it's a process of elimination, not a process of selection, and then you go on and explain to them what that means to them and how the whole process is, and you know, you'll save a lot of heartache, a lot of headaches if you explain that up front, you know, because no one, like you said, no seller is going to wait for you to get your act together and then come back to them with an offer when everybody else is already ready.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, just in all fairness, I try to always put the client in the other person's shoes. So whether it's a seller and they say, well, I want to list my house for $100,000 more than what it's worth, and you know, we remind them, hey, a buyer is going to ask their agent to do a CMA or comparative market analysis just like I'm doing for you, and we all basically have, you know, the same info that we're pulling from.
Mm-hmm.
Or whether I'm a buyer or working with a buyer and saying, hey, you know, we're asking the seller to take their home off the market just exclusively for us. We want to let them know that we've done all our due diligence and our homework up front, and they can feel confident taking their home off the market because we're financially prepared to close on this house.
Right. What were the other questions that we have from our listeners out there?
Sure. The second question is, what is the best way to finance a home purchase?
The best way to finance.
So I think that would be dependent upon what type of purchase it is, because sometimes you have somebody that's buying an investment property or a flip, And those are financed much differently. Sometimes people have open lines of credit that they're pulling from,
Right.
using
Hard
other
money.
properties as collateral, hard money loans.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a very,
Cash. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Cash,
So in,
FHA, 2 or 3K.
of course. I think a lot of it will have to do with what you're using the property as. Is it an investment property? Is it gonna be owner occupied? Sometimes people prefer to go cash, sometimes people prefer to not have all their cash on hand tied up.
Yeah. But the cash is king thing is a myth, by the way, in case you're listening.
So, it's funny, a lot of people talk about cash offers and I see it a lot where cash buyers will say, I'm a cash buyer and close quickly, no contingencies, close in 2 weeks.
But
And
they
it's
have,
like,
they have the
it's
lowest offers.
always the lowest
Yep.
offers. And I'll say, or it's not a one size fits all. So I'll say most of the time they have the lowest offers,
Mm-hmm.
but they're physically feeling each dollar come out of their pocket or bank account.
Right. It
As
hurts.
opposed to somebody who is financing, and I'll say this loosely, and don't throw any tomatoes at me or anything like that, but, a few $1,000s here or there, when you're talking monthly, it's pennies. And so when you're financing, it's a little bit different, and that's why, also on an end user, somebody who's buying a home to live in themselves and financing, they're willing to pay more. Right?
Sure.
Somebody who's buying it just to flip is looking at every dollar.
Sure.
And, they go in there typically with a lower offer. And I get a lot of sellers that say to me, so at the end of the day at the closing table, what is the difference between me getting a buyer who's getting a loan and a buyer who's paying cash? And the answer is nothing, right? Once you're through all the contingencies, there's nothing different. I will say it depends on the condition of the home. If you have a home, I had a home, you remember this, Marcos, where the foundation was sinking on one side of the house. And so, yeah, we definitely wanted a cash buyer for that
Yes.
house.
Sure.
Even a renovation financing, when it starts to get into structural, can be very difficult to get to the closing table. So that's an example of, hey, yes, cash would be the best offer for that house.
Yes.
But in a typical resale of a home, it doesn't matter. Like, I'll sometimes get these conversations with buyers and they'll say, oh, but I'm paying cash. And I just kind of revert back to, so let me ask you a question. If you're selling your home, will you take less? And most of the time we're talking about in excess of $50,000.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so I'm thinking about the last couple of listings that I had where I got cash offers and they were easily more than $50,000 less than even the asking price. And so on a property that's not in disrepair or distressed, why would somebody be so willing to go and take that much less, unless there was a situation where they needed that money in 2 weeks?
Yeah.
But even on a cash deal, they mostly don't close in 2 weeks, right? Because then we're going to get to title insurance and all this other stuff, which I know is, I think, one of the
Yes,
other
one of the
questions.
questions, yes.
So what is that other question?
You want to jump right into it?
Yeah, let's
So
get into
the
it.
question is, what is title insurance and why do I need it?
Title insurance is, in my opinion, the most important part of the transaction, right? So you can get a copy of your deed from the county, from your attorney, from whoever. You can get a copy of the deed. You can change keys. You can get copies of the keys. You can change your locks. That whole thing. I always tell my buyers when we go through a consultation, the title is more important than. It's not more important than the deed. I mean, the deed is important, right? But I mean, if you needed to grab a copy of it, more important than the keys, because the title insurance is the only thing you have that shows, let's say we're closing on a house today. That's the only proof that you have that from this day forward, the only lien that you have on the property is the mortgage that you're taking.
Right.
Unless you incur other liens. But meaning that you're protected and covered from today, prior of any prior owners, liens, judgments, mortgages, any kind of stuff like that. A lot of people don't realize the importance of it until they go to sell the house.
Right.
And some prior judgments come up, and the very simple solution is just to give them a copy of your owner's policy.
Right.
I think I should start a whole business on just, having people's title policies ready to go, scanned in, because they're not recorded anywhere.
Right.
So people's biggest mistake is they close, they get that title policy back in a couple of months, and they just, they're just pushing paper somewhere,
They have
in a
no
pile.
idea what that is.
No idea where it is. And then when they go to sell the home, some prior judgments come up from former owners or whatnot. And all we need is that policy, and they can't find it.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's more than whatever it is, 7 years, 10 years, whatever their rule is on how long they have to hold it, it can be really hard to track down copies of these policies. And so sometimes even trying to get payoffs or reaching out to those companies and making sure that those liens have been satisfied, and perhaps maybe they just didn't record that satisfaction. You have that policy that can clear that up so quickly. But what if you have a company that's closed or whatever it is? It can be really difficult sometimes getting in touch with them.
Yeah, so that's a pro tip right there. If you have a sale, coming up, they're about to close, or if you've closed recently, make sure you put that title policy away in a safe place that you can get to 10 years from now.
I would say
exactly
scan
where
it
is.
in immediately.
Scan it in.
Yeah.
Email
Right.
it to yourself.
Put it in the cloud.
Yes.
Send yourself an
Exactly.
email.
Yes.
Put it in your safe,
Google Drive.
whatever it is, if you have a safe
It's important.
or wherever you put important papers, firebox, anything like that, and I would say definitely scan it in. There's no reason not to.
Yeah, wherever you keep that deed, keep the title policy. Wherever you keep your cash, make sure that you're able to access this title policy if you need to run out of the house with it or anything. It's important to have that document for sure.
And I think the other part to it is, so when we list a property, we try to get that information or a hold of those documents up front. But a lot of people don't ask for it until it's like 2 weeks before closing, and now the seller is probably moved already.
They've packed up.
Boxes galore, and now you're asking for a policy from years ago, and now they just moved and they don't know where anything is.
Right.
So very, very important. And that title will protect you. I get sometimes buyers that say, no thank you, I don't need that. It's required,
Yeah.
at least on finance purchases, but you'd be crazy. I don't think any attorney would let you close, even on a cash purchase, without that. Unless it's a foreclosure. If you're buying a property at sheriff's sale, you're gonna get a sheriff's deed, which is not protecting you. You're not having title insurance on that.
Right.
You're basically gonna incur all the liens on the property. So it's definitely, while it's quite one of the largest parts of your closing costs, it's the most important, in my opinion.
What's our next question?
What are closing costs, and how much should I expect to pay?
So that's a really open-ended question, but I'll try to simplify it if I can.
It's based on your property taxes,
So of course, based on the property taxes, first based on the purchase price,
purchase price.
can also depend on, are you buying I'll say depends on what state you're in,
That
right?
also is
Because
true.
here in New Jersey, typically the seller pays for the transfer tax. But if you're buying a foreclosed home in New Jersey, typically the buyer pays the
Buyer pays it.
transfer tax.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to another state like Maryland, the buyer pays 1% transfer tax, the seller pays 1% transfer tax. So each state will vary. Definitely consult your attorney or title company or whomever it is. I would say average, just guesstimate 3%. Just in your mind, put aside 3% for the closing cost. Doesn't mean it's going to be that high, but it just varies so greatly, like you guys mentioned. The taxes, are you buying down the interest rate and paying points with the lender? Are you buying a property that has an HOA? because they typically have a bunch of fees due at closing,
Right.
joining the association, capital contribution, reserves, all that kind of stuff. Your homeowner's insurance, you know, application fees with a lender, appraisal, there's just a lot of fees, to protect you, right, and doing all your due diligence up until the closing. So I would say average, you just put in your mind about 3%.
That's a fair number.
So it's a good number.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What other questions do we have out there?
So final question, how long will it take to sell my house?
That's
Your
a good
your
question.
house, do you need a realtor? I'll be right over. I have the sign in my trunk. So, also, I feel like it depends on the type of property, right? We have a very fast-paced market right now.
Right.
But a lot of it has to do with the expectations of the seller, educating the seller on what's going on in the market. So just to give you an example, on Santos's $10 million property, on his ranch.
11 million.
11 million.
Excuse me. No, but in all fairness, so let's just say in our area, maybe an average sale price is about $550. If we go in there, if we know it's average about $550, we can't go and list it for $650 and expect a bidding war, or expect any offers at all, right?
Yeah.
So some people, I think there's a little bit of a, like, they can't get past that, right? They want to, there were always kind of two schools of thought on pricing and offers. So you had kind of the old school way, where a seller would put a price on their home. So let's just say, for example, $550, buyer comes in and offers $500, or maybe it wasn't that, you know, wide of a range, but maybe they offered $520, and then they met in the middle at $535, right? That was kind of how it was years ago. Today, with the inventory shortage and kind of the whole temperature of the hot market, buyers are kind of trained in their mindset that, hey, I know I'm gonna have to go in over asking. So if an average property value in a neighborhood that somebody's living at is $550, if you put that property at $599, now it very well might be that you list it at $550 and it sells for $589 without question, right? But if you put that same property up for $589, $599, and a buyer comes in and they're thinking, oh, we're gonna have to offer the asking price, right? And it's not a house in the 600s, you're gonna sit on the market for a while.
Yes.
And then you're gonna go through that whole kind of ugly process of what's wrong with that house.
Right.
You know, sometimes I have buyers that call me and say, there's a property that's been on for 4 days, is something wrong with it? And
Right. Well, so that goes back to the question, right, of, you know, how long will it take to sell my house? And the quick answer is, it depends on your expectation. Are you gonna price it reasonably and you know, to get that quick, you know, 45 to 60 day sale, or are you gonna price it where the home is worth, your neighborhood is a 550 neighborhood, but you wanna ask 600 for it, and so you have to wait for that price to catch up to that, or be disappointed later when you do have a 600, you know, or 610 offer, and you come to find out that the appraiser, the checks and balances in the whole
Sure.
equation, right? When the appraiser comes in and says, well, this is really, you know, a 550 neighborhood, but it's appraising upwards, so it's really 560, and now you have this 600 or 610 offer that you have to knock back down to 560. So that you're making this process take longer than normal because of your expectations weren't aligned with the market. Now, if you perfectly aligned with the market, then yeah, you can tell them between 45 and 60 days to
45,
close.
60 days.
Yeah, and some neighborhoods are tracking even faster than that, right? As far as the type of buyers that show up to certain homes, you know, they're just being very aggressive. And so some buyers may say, well, I know that I can close whenever, you know, within 30 days because
Yeah.
I'm ready. It's just up to you now. So they're giving you that flexibility.
Yes.
This flexibility of, you know, how you want to proceed. Do you want to move really fast, or do you want to move at this normal pace? And so the answer is, is it depends.
Well, and I think the absolute best answer to that question is you need to talk to a real estate professional and get a market analysis done. And what that will tell you is exactly that, right? What is the fair market value of the home, and
Yes.
what are the days on market? And so you can know, we're here to provide you that information, right? What you do with that information is what you do with it, right? You're in the
Yes.
driver's seat, you own the home. We can provide you what's going on in the market. That's our job to do so. And then you decide if that fits in line with what you had in mind,
Right.
right? So if I say 550 and Santos says, well, I really wanted 560, you know, have to think about, do I think that's reasonable? Do I think I could still, you know, do I think that that property is still gonna sell within his time frame, what he's looking to do, right? If he knows, if I know that it's a property that is in a neighborhood that somebody's gonna wanna get into the schools by a certain time, then if we're putting it up in June, we have to be pretty aggressive on the pricing
Absolutely.
to know, hey, it's gonna take 45 to 60 days to close, we don't have much time or room for error in case something falls through. So definitely the you know, call a real estate professional, get the market analysis, you'll get a whole kind of picture painted of what's going on in the market in your specific neighborhood. We'll always try to do an apples to apples comparison. It doesn't always work for some unique homes, but we can adjust accordingly and put that plan out there, and then the seller can decide if it's for them or not.
Yeah, so
I agree.
if the house is priced well, you should be expecting the sale to go between 45 to 60 days if everything goes well.
That's right.
So,
All right. Well, thank you guys for that Q&A session. This is Realtors Radio Network.
signing off.
Keep an ear out for the next episode of the Realtors Radio Network, where Santos Garcia, Marcos Suarez, and Dawn McCullough share their wealth of real estate knowledge. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, review, and share. Find us on social media at Realtors Radio Network. See you next time on the Realtors Radio Network.